The shuttle smelled like recycled air and something burnt, like someone had microwave metal. Maya Reeves pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched Earth shrink. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where it glowed gold and perfect. It just got smaller, like a blue marble someone dropped on a dark floor, and then it was gone behind a cloud of engine exhaust. She was 23 years old. She had $42 in her account, a backpack with 3 changes of clothes, and a scholarship letter that had arrived so late she almost missed the shuttle entirely. The Interstellar Academic Exchange Program, IAP, the most prestigious educational program in the known galaxy. 47 species, 212 planets represented, and exactly 1 human. Her, Maya Reeves from Columbus, Ohio, daughter of a school librarian and a man who fixed HVAC units for a living. She had gotten in not because her family had connections. They had none. Not because she had money. She had none of that either. She had gotten in because 3 years ago, at 18, she had published a paper on xenolinguistic pattern recognition that had somehow landed on the desk of a Velhari academic named Professor Sen, who had read it twice, then a third time, and then forwarded it to the IEP board with a single note attached. This one thinks differently. We should watch her. Maya didn't know any of that yet. She just knew she was on a shuttle, alone, heading to a space station called Meridian Cross that orbited a star she couldn't pronounce, to attend a school where she was the only human being in the entire student body. She pulled her sleeve down over her right hand out of habit. The tattoo on the back of her hand was old. She'd gotten it at 17, right after her mother died. Her mom had loved old Earth symbols, collected them the way other people collect stamps. This one was something her mom had kept in a journal, drawn carefully in blue ink on a page marked with a coffee ring. Maya had never fully understood what it meant. Her mother had simply told her, "It means you were here. That's enough." Maya had traced it onto her skin and carried it ever since. She fell asleep before the shuttle reached the jump gate. She dreamed about the library where her mom used to work, the smell of old books, the creak of wooden floors, the quiet that felt like a blanket. When she woke up, the window showed stars she didn't recognize. She was somewhere else now, completely, entirely somewhere else. The docking bay of Meridian Cross was enormous in a way that made Maya's brain quietly give up trying to process the scale of it. The ceiling, if you could call it that, was so high that the lights at the top looked like stars themselves. Hundreds of ships, big and small, docked in organized rows along curved walls that seemed to breathe with a slow mechanical hum. And the students, they were everywhere. Maya had studied alien species academically. She'd read papers, watched footage, analyzed communication patterns. But reading about a 7-foot Velhari with silver skin and 4 arms was very different from standing 3 feet away from one while he looked down at her like she was something he'd accidentally stepped in. She gripped the strap of her backpack. Okay, she told herself. You've survived worse. She had, but standing in that docking bay, surrounded by creatures from 47 different civilizations, all of them moving with a kind of casual confidence that came from never doubting their place in the universe, Maya felt something she hadn't felt since her mother's funeral. Small, the Dravani student, blue-skinned, nearly translucent, with wide eyes that caught light like a cat's, bumped into her without looking and made a sound that Maya's translator earpiece rendered as mild irritation, the kind you'd feel if a piece of furniture moved unexpectedly. Not a person. Furniture. Maya kept walking. She found the registration desk after 10 minutes of getting turned around twice and accidentally walking into what turned out to be a pressurized aquatic corridor for Cellen students, which she discovered when the floor went wet and something large and thin pressed its face against a glass wall and stared at her with enormous yellow eyes. She backed out, soaking from the ankles down, and found the registration desk around the corner. The administrator was a Tority, compact gray, with small dark eyes set deep in a wide flat face. He looked at Maya's registration form, then at Maya, then back at the form. Human, he said. It wasn't a question. Maya Reeves, she confirmed, from the IEP scholarship program. He processed her slowly, like a machine running old software. He gave her a student ID, a room assignment, and a class schedule without ever smiling or making eye contact again. Her room was on level 7, Section C. She found it eventually. It was small but clean, designed for a humanoid frame, which she appreciated. The bed was slightly too long. The window looked out at open space, a view so stunning that she sat on the edge of the mattress and just stared at it for a full 20 minutes. Stars in every direction, no horizon, no ground, just infinite dark and infinite light. Okay, she thought again. You're here. That's enough. She pressed her tattooed hand flat against the cold glass. Outside, Meridian Cross hummed around her. 212 planets worth of students. None of them human. None of them expecting anything from her. That was fine. She'd never needed anyone to expect things from her before. Her first class was Introduction to Galactic Systems Theory. Room 14A, 7th floor of the academic wing. She arrived 4 minutes early because she was always early. Her mom had drilled it into her since childhood. Early is on time. On time is late. The room was a wide amphitheater-style lecture hall with curved rows of seats descending toward a central platform. Lighting shifted between warm amber and pale blue in slow cycles. The air smelled faintly of something floral, probably an atmospheric adjustment for a species Maya hadn't identified yet. She picked a seat in the middle row. Not the front. That felt too eager. Not the back. That felt like hiding. Students filtered in gradually. A group of Elhari. 3 of them, tall and silver and moving with the kind of effortless grace that made Maya feel like she walked with her feet on wrong, took seats 2 rows ahead. They were talking, their voices a layer harmonic that her earpiece translated in fragments. One of them glanced back and saw Maya. He said something to the others. They all looked. Maya had learned very young not to look away when people stared. She'd grown up as one of 3 black kids in her entire elementary school. She knew what it felt like to be looked at like you didn't belong. So she met the Velhari student's gaze and held it, calm and level, until he turned back around. But she heard what the earpiece caught of their conversation. That's a human. Apparently. I read the admission notes. Scholarship. First human ever. A pause. Then low and careless. They really are letting anyone in now. Maya looked down at her tablet and opened her class materials. She did not let her jaw tighten. She did not let her hands grip the tablet too hard. She breathed by the time the professor arrived, a tall, elegant Velhari woman named Professor Era, with 4 arms and silver-white skin and eyes like deep water. The room was full, 40 students from at least 12 different species. Maya counted 2 other humanoid species, both significantly taller than her. Everyone else was something altogether different. Professor Era swept her gaze across the room, and it landed, briefly, on Maya. Something passed through her expression, not unkindness. Exactly. More like careful neutrality. Like a scientist observing a variable she wasn't sure about yet. Welcome, Professor Era said, and her voice filled the room without effort, warm and carrying. This is Galactic Systems Theory. Over the course of this term, you'll be asked to think larger than your home planet, larger than your species, larger than the assumptions that your civilization has built into you since birth. She paused. That will be harder for some of you than others. Her eyes didn't return to Maya. They didn't need to. Maya wrote that line down. Larger than the assumptions your civilization has built into you. She underlined it. The dining hall was called a common, and it was exactly what it sounded like, a massive open space where every student on Meridian Cross was theoretically welcome. In practice, species clustered together the way particles did in chemistry, finding bonds forming along lines of familiarity and comfort. Maya carried her tray, standard human-compatible meal, pre-ordered through the system, something that looked like rice and something that looked like it might have once been a vegetable, and stood at the edge of the common, doing a quiet inventory. Velhari cluster, front left. Large table, animated conversation, exclusive. Dravani cluster, center, smaller group, quieter, blue light reflecting off their translucent skin. Keth, the insectoid species from the Meridian Belt, occupied a long, low table near the back, seated on a different style of furniture entirely, and scattered in between various other groupings, some mixed, most not. Maya found an empty table near a window. She sat down. She ate. She watched. This was something she was good at. Watching. Her mother had called it her superpower. You notice things other people walk right past, Baby, you always have. She was halfway through her meal when a shadow fell across her tray. She looked up point three students. Two Velhari and one she hadn't seen before, a Marathi, she thought, from the copper tone of the skin and the slightly enlarged cranium. All three were looking at her with the comfortable ease of people who had never once in their lives wondered if they were allowed to be somewhere. The one who spoke was the Velhari from her morning class, the one who'd made the comment about letting anyone in. Up close, he was even taller, nearly 7 feet, with silver skin that had faint geometric patterns running along the jaw and temples. His name, she'd learned from the class roster, was Ken. "You're at the wrong table," Ken said pleasantly. Maya looked at the table, then back at him. "Is this table assigned?" "No, but it's where we sit. There's no one sitting here but me." "There will be." He smiled, and it was a kind of smile that had been used for centuries by people who were very sure of their own rightness. "You'll be more comfortable somewhere else." Maya picked up her fork. She ate a bite of the vegetable-adjacent thing, chewed, swallowed. "I'm pretty comfortable here," she said. Something shifted in Can's expression. Not anger, more like surprise, quickly covered. He wasn't used to being answered back. That much was obvious. The Marathi student, shorter, sharp-eyed, named Bryn, she'd learned later, made a sound that her earpiece translated as amusement, though not friendly amusement. More like the sound you make when a small animal does something unexpectedly stubborn. It speaks confidently for something from a class, for civilization. Bryn said, not lowering his voice, Class 4. That was a Galactic classification system's designation for Earth. On a scale of 1 to 12, for was considered, in the most diplomatic language the system used, pre-emergent, capable of basic space travel, not yet considered a full participant in galactic society. Some species went their whole lives without meeting a Class 4. Some considered the designation the polite version of something much less kind. Maya set her fork down. She looked at Bryn directly. "What classification are you?" Bryn blinked. 7. "And how long has your civilization been spacefaring?" 40,000 years. Maya nodded slowly. "And in 40,000 years, has your civilization ever sent one of its own to this institution on a merit scholarship?" She paused just for a beat. "I got in because of my work. Not my species. Not my planet's classification. My work." She picked up her fork again. "So I'm comfortable here." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Ken laughed, a short, dismissive sound, but there was something behind it. Something that hadn't been there before. A small, reluctant recalibration. They left. Maya finished her meal alone. She told herself it didn't matter. She'd been alone before. She was good at alone. But when she walked back to her room that evening and pressed her back against the closed door and sat down on the floor for a few minutes just breathing, she was honest enough with herself to admit that it did matter a little. Not their opinion. Not their approval. Just a simple, human way to being far from home, surrounded by people who looked at her and saw a classification number. She looked at the tattoo on her right hand. "You were here. That's enough." She got up off the floor. She had studying to do. The first week passed in a blur of classes, navigation errors, and small humiliations that Maya cataloged and filed away rather than dwelling on. She was accidentally assigned to a lab section designed for a species with respiratory needs incompatible with oxygen. She spent 40 minutes in a corridor while that got sorted. Her earpiece translation lag was occasionally bad enough that she answered questions a full sentence behind the conversation. In advanced xenolinguistics, she mispronounced a Velhari word so badly that 2 students actually covered their auditory receptors. But she also did her work. She did it carefully, thoroughly, and with the kind of relentless attention that came from knowing that every mistake she made wouldn't just reflect on her. It would reflect on the human species, on every argument for or against Earth's right to participate in the galactic community. She felt that weight every single day. It wasn't fair that she had to carry it. She carried it anyway. Professor Era assigned the first major assessment of the term at the end of week 1, a comparative analysis of communication systems across 3 non-human civilizations, focusing on the underlying cognitive structures that shape language development. Most students chose civilizations from their own galactic region, familiar territory. Maya chose the Velhari, the Keth, and the Selen. Three species with communication systems so different from each other: harmonic vocalization, pheromone-based chemical signaling, and deep-frequency resonance through water, that most xenolinguists consider the comparison nearly impossible. The cognitive frameworks were too divergent, the common variables too few. Her classmates, when the topic choices were shared in the following session, were audibly unimpressed. She's comparing Velhari vocalization to chemical signaling. She heard from 2 rows back, in a tone that required no translation. That's either very ambitious or very stupid. Ken, without turning around, said, "With humans, it's usually the second one." Quiet laughter from nearby seats. Professor Era, at the front of the room, did not respond to this, but her gaze moved to Maya for just a moment, and Maya couldn't read what was in it. Maya wrote 3 more notes in her tablet and kept her face calm. She had 6 weeks to prove them wrong. She intended to use all 6. Meridian Cross had a library, or rather, it had what the official documentation called a comprehensive knowledge repository, which was the most boring possible name for the most incredible room Maya had ever been in. It was circular, 3 stories tall, and the walls were not shelves but screens, living, responsive surfaces that contained the archived knowledge of every member civilization of the Galactic Compact. 430 years of accumulated documentation, research, cultural records, and academic work from species whose civilizations made Earth's entire recorded history look like a footnote. Maya found on her 3rd day and started spending evenings there. She was there on a Thursday night, 3 weeks into term, deep in Velhari cognitive linguistics, when she found something that made her stop. She'd been cross-referencing the underlying structural logic of Velhari harmonic language, the way tonal layers in their speech carried simultaneous streams of meaning, much like chords in music, against older academic work on human music theory, looking for a comparison point that might help frame her analysis. She'd pulled up a digitized archive of pre-galactic contact human cultural materials, mostly loaded by Earth's Compact Liaison Office, sparse and incomplete as Earth's galactic participation was still relatively new. Music files, linguistic samples, a handful of anthropological records, and there, buried in a subcategory labeled symbolic cultural records, Earth region, Central/Eastern Africa, 14th to 16th century. She found something that made the air leave her lungs. A symbol, digitized from a historical document, faded ink on aged material, origin listed as unknown tribal context, significance unverified. It was her tattoo. Exactly, perfectly, down to the specific curve of each line, the exact weight of each stroke. The symbol her mother had drawn in that journal from a source she'd never fully explained. The one Maya carried on the back of her right hand. Maya stared at it for a long time. Then she started reading the surrounding context notes, which were brief and unhelpful. The archive entry was flagged as significance, unverified. But at the bottom, there was a linked cross-reference, a connection the archive system had automatically generated to another document. She clicked it. The linked document was not from the Earth Archive. It was from the Velhari Cultural Repository, specifically from the Astronomical and Navigational Records section, subsection, Pre-Migration Era, approximate dating, 6,000 years before Standard Galactic Calendar. The symbol was there too. Same symbol. Exactly the same. Different planet. Different species. 6,000 years ago. Maya sat back in her chair and stared at the screen until it dimmed from inactivity, and she had to move her hand to wake it back up, her tattooed hand, the one with the symbol. Were you? She thought, not for the first time. But now the question had a whole different weight behind it. She copied everything. Every reference, every linked document, every cross-citation the archive system could generate. She pulled related records from the Dravani cultural files, from the Keth symbolic registry, from Marathi prehistoric documentation. The symbol appeared in 7 of them, 7 different species, 7 different planets, ranging from 2,000 to 9,000 years ago. None of the entries made the connection to each other. The archive cross-referencing had never linked them because no one had ever searched across that many different cultural databases at once for the same pattern. Until Maya. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the library until the overnight atmosphere cycle changed the lighting to deep blue, and the repository was empty except for her and the quiet hum of stored knowledge. By morning, she had filled 43 pages of notes. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She needed to understand what she was looking at before she said a word about it. She went to her morning classes. She answered questions when called on. She ate lunch at her table by the window. Alone, as usual, though a Giovanni student named Liz had started sitting 2 seats down in the last week, not speaking, just coexisting, which Maya had decided to consider a form of progress. She went back to the library that evening, and the one after that, she was building something. She didn't know what yet, but she could feel the shape of it starting to form. The way you feel a word you know, but can't quite say, yet sitting at the back of your tongue. In her 4th week, the class had its first graded seminar, a live discussion session, where students presented preliminary findings from their assessments, and the group responded. Maya went 7th. She stood at the front of the room, small and steady, and laid out the initial framework of her comparative analysis. She explained why she'd chosen the 3 species she had. She walked through the structural logic she was building toward, not the full argument, just the architecture of it. When she finished, the first question came from Can. Your framework assumes a common cognitive baseline across 3 species with no documented evolutionary overlap, he said. That's not a framework. That's a fantasy. It's a hypothesis, Maya said, which is different. Not if the hypothesis has no support. It has support. I haven't presented it yet because this is a preliminary session. She looked at him steadily. That's what preliminary means. Professor Era, seated to one side, made a note on her tablet. Bryn raised his hand. What cognitive baseline are you proposing? All 3 species process communication through entirely different biological systems. Velhari through harmonic vocalization, Keth through chemical emission, Selin through water pressure resonance. There's no overlap. There's no surface overlap, Maya said. But I'm not looking at the surface. Then what are you looking at? Maya paused. She wasn't ready to talk about the symbol yet. Not publicly. Not until she understood it better. But she could talk about the underlying thread she'd found. I'm looking at the architecture underneath the communication system, she said. The cognitive logic that shapes what each species considers necessary to communicate at all. What information they choose to encode. What they leave out. Those choices aren't random. They reflect something deeper about how each species processes reality. She looked around the room. And when you go deep enough past the biology and the cultural overlay and the historical development, I'm finding something that looks, so far, like it might be the same. Silence. Not mocking silence. Not immediate dismissal. Actual thinking silence. Professor Era looked up from her tablet. Her deep water eyes rested on Maya for a moment. Continue that line of inquiry, she said, and document everything. It wasn't praise. It was a professor telling a student to keep working. But it was something. Her name was Liz. And she was Giovanni, and she was the first person on Meridian Cross who talked to Maya voluntarily. It happened on a Tuesday evening in the 5th week, in the library, where Liz had apparently also been spending her evenings without Maya noticing. Maya looked up from her screen and found Liz sitting directly across the table, watching her with those wide Giovanni eyes that caught light like a cat's. Maya didn't startle. She'd learned to recognize Giovanni movement. They were quiet and quick in a way that would have been unsettling if she hadn't studied their species' evolutionary history, predator ancestry, though they'd been a peaceful civilization for millennia. You're reading the pre-migration Velhari records, Liz said. Her translator produced a clear, slightly melodic voice. Yes, Maya said. Why? Maya considered. Then she turned her tablet so Liz could see the screen. Liz leaned forward. Her translucent skin caught the blue library light and scattered it in small prismatic shapes across the table. She looked at the symbol for a long time. I've seen this before, Liz said. Maya's pulse jumped. Where? Liz sat back slowly. In the Giovanni Heritage Archive. My grandmother, she was a cultural historian. She had a reproduction of an ancient navigational artifact that had this mark on it, or something very close to it. She tilted her head in the Giovanni expression of careful consideration. I thought it was a Giovanni design. She thought it was too, but she also said she'd never been able to find the original source. Maya turned her tablet back toward herself. I found it in 7 separate cultural databases, 7 different species. The oldest entry is 9,000 years old. Liz was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you think it means? I don't know yet, Maya said, but I think something, wanted multiple species to have it. And I think whatever that something was, it knew about all 7 of us before any of us knew about each other. The library hummed quietly around them. That's a very large claim, Liz said. I know. Do you have support for it? I'm building it. Liz considered this. Then she did something Maya hadn't expected. She opened her own tablet and set it on the table between them. I have access to the Dravani Restricted Cultural Archive through my grandmother's academic credentials, she said. She died 2 years ago and the access was never revoked. She said it simply, without theatrical weight. Just a fact about her grandmother. There may be more there. Maya looked at her. Why are you helping me? Liz met her eyes directly. Another culturally significant gesture for Dravani. Maya knew. Direct eye contact was an offering of trust. Because you're asking a question that should have been asked a long time ago, she said. And because my grandmother spent 40 years trying to find the source of that symbol. I think she'd want someone to keep looking. Maya looked down at the tattoo on her hand. My mother found it too, she said quietly. In an old book. She never knew what it was. Something moved through Liz's wide eyes. Then we owe it to both of them, she said. They worked until deep into the overnight cycle. Side by side, the human and the Dravani, in the blue hum of the library, chasing something neither of them could yet name. In class the following week, Kim made a comment about Maya's research topic during a group discussion that was, in its way, more cutting than anything he'd said before, because it was delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had decided the matter and saw no need to revisit it. The hypothesis assumes a connection that can't exist because the civilizations in question had no contact with each other during the relevant historical periods, he said, addressing the room more than Maya, which means either the evidence is being misread or the researcher is seeing patterns that aren't there. Humans are known for that pattern recognition that exceeds available data. It's a survival trait from a pre-rational period of your species' development. He said it like a fact from a textbook. Informative. Clinical. It tends to produce a lot of mythology. Several students nodded or made sounds of agreement. Maya watched Kim with the same steady calm she always maintained in public. Pattern recognition that exceeds available data, she repeated. Is that a limitation or a skill? Kim looked at her. It depends entirely on whether the pattern is real. Yes, Maya said. It does. She held his gaze for exactly long enough. Then she turned back to her tablet. But that night, alone in her room, she looked at the tattoo and felt the first real tremor of doubt. What if she was wrong? What if she was doing exactly what could described? A young woman far from home, grieving, lonely, finding meaning in coincidence because she needed to find it. She sat with that possibility for a long time. Let it breathe. Let it be real. Then she went back to her notes. Not to escape the doubt, but to answer it. Because if she was right, the evidence would hold. And if she was wrong, the evidence would show her that too. Either way, she would know. The Dravani Restricted Archive had records that Maya's access didn't reach. But Liz's borrowed credentials opened them, and what they found inside shifted everything. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a series of markings found on a Dravani artifact recovered from the deep ocean of their home world. Dated to approximately 8,000 years ago, the artifact was some kind of vessel, not a ship, something smaller, the size of a human hand, smooth and dark and made of material that Dravani scientists had classified as non-native composition because it didn't match any naturally occurring mineral on their planet. Someone had brought it there. The symbol was on its surface, along with 17 other markings that the archive documentation described as unidentified sequential notation, possible numeric or navigational system. Sequential notation, Maya said softly. She was looking at the digitized images of the artifact, zoomed in as close as the scan quality allowed. My grandmother believed it was a map, Liz said. But to what? She never determined. Not a map, Maya said, working through it as she spoke. Look at the sequence pattern. It's not spatial. The intervals aren't consistent enough for navigation. They're variable, like a message that changes based on what you already know when you read it. She pulled up the Velhari pre-migration records on her own tablet and placed them side by side with the Dravani artifact images. These markings here, they appear in both. Same sequence, same interval pattern, and in the Ket symbolic registry. There's a category of ancient marks classified as ceremonial because no one understood their function. Some of them are in the sequence too. Liz leaned over the screens. You're saying someone sent the same message to 7 different species, or left it for them, placed it somewhere they'd find it when they were ready. Maya exhaled slowly, a message designed to be found by civilizations at different stages of development that would only be understood when someone compared the versions from all 7. But no one compared them because no one knew to look across all 7 civilizations. No one who knew about all 7 of them had a reason to connect the symbol to all 7 archives. Maya looked at her tattooed hand, until someone showed up carrying one on their hand. Liz was quiet for a moment. Then, Maya, what are you saying? Maya set her tablet down. She pressed her hands flat on the table, both of them, and stared at the screens. I'm saying I think there's an 8th species, she said. One that made contact with all 7 of these civilizations thousands of years before any of them could contact each other. One that left a message that can only be read by reading all the pieces together. And I think whatever that message says, it's been waiting for someone to find it. Why? Liz asked, why leave a message that would take thousands of years and a specific intersection of knowledge to read? Because they want to make sure we were ready when we read it, Maya said. They wanted to make sure we develop enough to find all the pieces ourselves, that we'd grown enough to have institutions like this one. She gestured at the library around them, at Meridian Cross beyond its walls, places where all of us are in the same room, where the knowledge from all of us is in the same archive. She looked at Liz. They were waiting for us to meet each other. She spent 2 weeks working on the sequence. It was not the work of 2 weeks. It was a work that should have taken years, decades, a full research team and proper institutional resources. Maya did with a tablet, borrowed archive credentials. A Dravani student whose grandmother's notes turned out to be meticulous and brilliant, and whatever she could find in the open access sections of the Meridian Cross repository. She was running on 5 hours of sleep a night, and eating whatever was fastest at the Common. She was falling behind in 2 of her other courses. She knew it and couldn't fully stop herself, because the sequence was speaking, not to her dramatically, not all at once, but in slow increments, the way a picture forms when you step back from pieces you've been too close to see. Each time she matched a marking from one culture's archive to its counterpart in another, the overall structure became clearer, more coherent, more intentionally designed. She was building a cipher without a key, but she was getting closer. And then Liz found something in her grandmother's notes that stopped them both. A translation attempt. Partial. Incomplete. Her grandmother had gotten 30% of the sequence before she died. And in that 30% were 3 words. 3 concepts that Liz's grandmother had rendered in Dravani, with a notation that they might not translate well. Maya ran them through the earpiece translator. Then the archive system's high-precision linguistic processor. 3 concepts. Before the separation. The ones who remember. Come home. Maya made a mistake. She told her academic counselor. Her counselor was a Velhari administrator named Coordinator Veth, efficient, organized, and operating with a kind of bureaucratic logic that treated unusual things as problems to be managed rather than discoveries to be examined. Maya laid out her findings in a 40-minute meeting, presented carefully with documentation. Veth listened, made notes, asked a few procedural questions. Then he said, "This is outside the scope of your current academic assessment. I'd recommend refocusing on your coursework." Maya stared at him. "I think I've found evidence of an 8th civilization that made contact with 7 separate species thousands of years ago. I think there's a message embedded across multiple cultural archives that no one has ever assembled before." "That is a significant claim," Veth said, with the tone of someone saying that is a very tall building, acknowledging the scale without engaging with it. "Yes, And your evidence base is cross-references between cultural archive records. Yes, with supporting documentation from the Ms. Reeves. Veth set down his notes. Humans have been members of the Galactic Compact for 63 years. Earth is a class for civilization. I say this not to dismiss you, but to provide context. This institution has produced researchers at the highest levels of galactic academia for 4 centuries. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, presented through appropriate channels, reviewed by qualified specialists. He was not unkind. He was perfectly, systematically unhelpful. What you have described is an interesting personal research thread. It is not, at this point, a discovery. Maya left his office. She stood in the corridor outside, alone, and let the frustration move through her, without acting on it, because she had learned, from her mother, from her childhood, from every room she'd ever walked into where someone had quietly decided she didn't belong, that acting on frustration in the moment rarely produced useful results. Then she walked back to the library. But word had apparently gotten out about the meeting. Meridian Cross was a small academic community, and Coordinator Veth was apparently not as discreet as he seemed. Because the following morning in class, Ken knew. She could tell by the way he looked at her when she walked in. Not the usual cold dismissal. Something sharper, more deliberately aimed. He waited until the open discussion portion. I heard about your theory, he said, addressing her across the room in a way that made it very clear this was not a private comment. The 8th species, the ancient message. He let a beat pass. My family has 3 generations of xenoarchaeologists. I grew up in the galactic academic tradition. What you're describing isn't discovery. It's a pattern-matching exercise conducted by someone without the academic foundation to recognize the difference between genuine connection and coincidence. The room was completely quiet. You found a symbol on your body that you then found in several cultural archives, he continued. This is not research. This is a personal attachment driving a narrative. He wasn't shouting. He was worse than shouting. He was calm and certain and systematically dismantling her in front of everyone. Humans have been pattern seekers since your pre-rational period. It's why you created religion, mythology, folklore. It's why you see faces in clouds. This is the same impulse, dressed in academic language. Maya sat through all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not get angry. Or rather, she was angry deeply, cleanly angry, but she kept it behind her eyes where he couldn't use it against her. When he was done, she said, "Can I ask you something?" He gestured slightly. "Go ahead." The symbol appears in 7 separate cultural archives, in civilizations with no documented historical contact, over a period of 9,000 years. Artifact analysis from the Dravani record confirms the presence of non-native material composition, material that doesn't exist naturally on their planet. The sequential notation across all 7 instances follows an identical mathematical interval structure. She paused. Tell me specifically, which part of that is coincidence? Ken looked at her. The conclusion you've drawn from it, he said. An 8th species, a deliberate message. That's where you leave evidence and enter mythology. That's where I leave what I can prove and enter what I'm still investigating, Maya said, which is what research is. He said nothing. Professor Era, from the side of the room, looked between them with an expression that, for the first time, Maya thought she might be able to read. She looked like someone watching a race, and she wasn't sure yet who was going to win. That evening, Liz was already at their table in the library when Maya arrived. She had a new set of notes open, her grandmother's, the later volumes that she'd been working through slowly because the handwriting was dense and in an older form of Dravani script that required additional translation. I found something, Liz said without preamble. She turned her tablet. Her grandmother's notes, on a page from what appeared to be the final months of her research, had a detailed sketch, not the symbol. Something else, a diagram of the artifact, the small dark vessel from the deep ocean, but rendered from a different angle than the archive photographs, with annotations. One annotation read, "Interior structure, sealed. Suspected internal contents. Instrumentation, unknown. The artifact is sealed," Liz said. "There's something inside. My grandmother suspected it, but the archive record treats it as a solid object because the exterior scan was never deep enough to detect the interior chamber. Maya stared at the diagram. Where's the artifact now? Giovanni Cultural Heritage Museum, Liz said. My grandmother's institution. She had access to the physical object. She paused. I have the credentials. Maya looked at her. Liz, you can't access a museum artifact remotely. No, Liz agreed, but I can contact the current curator. My grandmother's former colleague. He knew her well. He knows who I am. She held Maya's gaze. If what's inside that artifact is what I think it might be, what your research suggests it might be, he would want to know. Maya looked down at the tattoo. Come home. Send a message, she said. The curator's name was Dr. Pale, and he was ancient even by Giovanni's standards. Skin so translucent you could see the faint branching lines of his circulatory system beneath it, moving slow and blue in his neck and hands. He appeared on the communication screen 3 days after Lys's message, in the early morning of Meridian Cross's ship-time day, when the library was empty and the lighting was in its pale pre-dawn cycle. He looked at Lys for a long moment, with the warmth of someone seeing a person they love in the face of someone else they love. You have your grandmother's eyes, he said, in Giovanni, which Lys translated softly for Maya. She would have been glad to see you here. Then he looked at Maya. He looked at her hand. His expression shifted, not with surprise. Exactly. More like the particular feeling of something you have long suspected being confirmed. You found it, he said. Maya went still. You know the symbol? Your grandmother, he addressed Lys here, gently, spent the last 2 years of her research trying to find who else had it. She found 6 cultures. She knew there should be a 7th. She couldn't determine which species. He paused. She didn't know about humans. Earth was not yet in the compact archive when she was working. Maya's voice was very steady. What do you know about the artifact? The interior. Dr. Pale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, come to Giovanni. Getting from Meridian Cross to the Giovanni home system without academic authorization, without travel funding, and without a registered vessel was not straightforward. What they had, Lys's family access to a small personal transit pod used by her family for intersystem travel, currently docked at Meridian Cross, the kind of vessel students occasionally use for sanctioned excursions. No one would flag it leaving if Lys filed a standard recreational transit notice. What they were risking. If this went wrong, if they left without authorization and came back with nothing, Maya's scholarship was probably gone. Lys's academic standing was probably gone. 2 academic careers, barely started, on the line for a theory that might be exactly what they called it, mythology. They left on a Friday evening. The transit to Giovanni took 22 hours. They spent most of it in the small cab of the pod, going over every piece of research they had, checking and rechecking, building the full documented case as carefully as they could. By the time they reached Giovanni orbit, Maya had a research document that was 47 pages long and sourced to the original archive entries with full cross-references. If she was wrong, she had at least been thorough about it. Dr. Pale met them at the museum's private entrance, an old, low building by the cultural harbor of the Giovanni capital city, where the ocean was dark green and moved in long, slow swells under a sky that held 2 moons, both of them smaller than Earth's, both of them pale and close. Maya stepped outside the transport and smelled salt. It cut through the strange air of an alien planet. And for one moment, she was so suddenly homesick that it was physical. The ocean smelled the same. Salt was salt. The universe had not changed that. At least, Dr. Pale led them through the museum, past display cases of cultural artifacts, past painted records of Giovanni history, past photographs of expeditions and excavations, to a room at the back of the building that was not labeled and not accessible without his personal biometric clearance. Inside, a single case in the center of the room, climate-controlled, sealed, lit from below. Inside the case, the artifact. Maya had looked at digitized scans for weeks. Standing in front of the physical object was different. It was small, barely the length of her forearm, and narrow, dark to the point of light-absorbing, smooth as something that had been worn by water for centuries. And on its surface, clear even in the low lighting of the room, the symbol, her tattoo. She stood in front of it for a long moment, without speaking. Dr. Pale moved to a control panel beside the case. Your grandmother, he said to Liz. She identified the interior chamber in her final months. At that point, she was ill, and the process for accessing the artifact without damaging it was, he paused, choosing the word carefully, beyond what we could safely attempt with the technology we had then. He looked at Maya. 2 months ago, we acquired new deep material scanning capability from a Velhari research institution. I scanned the artifact. He brought up the scan on a screen beside the case. Interior, a chamber, roughly cylindrical, sealed by a mechanism they had not yet determined. And inside the chamber, something that the scan rendered as dense and structured and complex. We believe the recording device, Dr. Pale said. Passive storage. Whatever is on it. It's been waiting for approximately 9,000 years in a perfect preservation environment. Can you open it? Maya asked. The mechanism, he hesitated, doesn't respond to any Dravani tool or frequency we've tried, or Velhari, or Keth, from what my colleagues in those institutions have attempted on similar artifacts. He looked at Maya again, that same look he'd given her when he first saw her hand. We have never tried human frequency ranges. Maya looked at the artifact, at the symbol on its surface, at her hand. She looked at Liz. Liz said very quietly, Your grandmother's last known journal, the very last page, said that she believed the seventh culture will be the one with access, that the seventh piece of the symbol was the key. Maya thought about her mother, about a journal with a coffee ring stain, about a symbol drawn carefully in blue ink by a woman who had found it in an old book and never known what it was, about the way her mother had said, It means you were here. That's enough. What do you need me to do? Maya asked. Dr. Pale opened the case. The mechanism opened when Maya pressed her tattooed hand flat against the surface. Not dramatically, not with a flash of light, or a sound like thunder. The seam simply separated, clean and precise, the way a well-made thing opens when it's finally, after a long time, used correctly. Inside, a disc no bigger than Maya's palm, dark like the artifact, smooth, with the same faintly light-absorbing quality. And on its surface, the full sequence. All 17 markings complete in the correct order, small and exact. Dr. Pale's hand shook very slightly as he transferred the disc to the analysis interface. He was 900 years old, in human terms, and Maya could see that he was trying not to show how much this moment meant to him. The analysis interface processed for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Then it began to render an output. It was not audio. It was not video. It was a structured data package. Information encoded in a format that the analysis system parsed slowly, generating text as it went, layering translation on top of translation, the machine working through 7 languages simultaneously to find the common thread. Maya and Liz and Dr. Pale stood in the small back room of the museum, by the harbor where the green ocean moved slowly under 2 pale moons, and read. The message was not long. It didn't need to be. The species that had left it called themselves, in the closest translation the analysis could generate, something that rendered as the architects. They had been a spacefaring civilization more than 12,000 years ago. They had traveled between the stars in the era before the 7 species who received the message had developed beyond their home planets. They had watched each of the 7 civilizations from a careful distance. They had not interfered with development. They had not revealed themselves. But they had recognized something in each of these 7 civilizations that they had only seen one other time before, in themselves, in their own early history. What they had recognized, the capacity for connection across difference. Not just intelligence. Many civilizations had intelligence. Not just technology. Many civilizations developed technology. But the specific, rare quality of being able to look at something completely unlike yourself and choose to understand it rather than destroy it. The architects had left the marks as a test, as a threshold. The message could only be found by someone who was willing to look across all 7 civilizations at once, who had access to all 7 archives, who recognized a pattern across the boundaries of species and culture and history. Someone who was, by definition, already living in the kind of world the architects had hoped would eventually exist. When the 7 symbols were brought together, When someone stood at the intersection of all 7 cultures, the message would be complete. And the message said, "We were here once, as you are now. We have not forgotten you." The 8th place at the table was always yours. If you are reading this, you are ready. Follow the sequence. We left the door. Below that, coordinates. Not in any of the 7 species' native systems. In a universal format, mathematical, spatial, unambiguous. Coordinates to a location in space. And below the coordinates, one final line. Come home. Dr. Pale sat down heavily in a chair. His translucent face was very still. Liz was completely quiet, her wide eyes moving over the text on the screen with an expression Maya had never seen on her before. Something like awe, something like grief, something like the feeling of a door opening you'd given up believing was real. Maya stood in front of the screen and read the message 3 times. She thought about her mother. She thought about a woman in a library finding a symbol in an old book, not knowing why it called to her, not knowing that it had been placed in 100 places across 100 generations, seeded through human culture, passed from hand to hand across centuries, waiting for a moment when a human being stood in a room where all 7 cultures met. Her mother hadn't known, but she had kept it. She had drawn it in ink. She had pressed it into her daughter's skin. It means you were here. That's enough. Maya pressed her hand flat against her chest. We have to go back, she said. We have to tell them. They won't believe you, Dr. Pale said quietly. Not cruelly, just the assessment of a very old scientist who had tried to present unexpected findings before. I have the artifact, Maya said. The disk, the analysis output, the full research documentation. She paused. And I have this. She held up her right hand, the tattoo, the symbol, the 7th key, the thing that had unlocked what 9,000 years of waiting had protected. They don't have to believe me. They have to look at the evidence. And then they can decide. She looked at Liz. Liz straightened, pulled her tablet, began compiling the documentation with the focused calm of someone who had made a decision and was executing it. Dr. Pale, Maya said, will you testify to what you found here? What the artifact is, what the analysis showed. He looked at her, very old eyes, the eyes of someone who had lived long enough to see a lot of things he thought mattered turn out not to, and some things he dismissed turn out to matter enormously. I will, he said. I've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask. They were back at Meridian Cross in 24 hours. They were met at the docking bay by Coordinator Veth, who had apparently been notified of their unauthorized transit and had brought 2 administrative officers with him, and an expression that suggested a very long, very formal conversation was incoming. Maya walked off the pod first. She was tired in the way that lives through itself, bone-tired. 3 days without proper sleep, unwashed, still wearing the same clothes she'd left in. She did not look like someone who had just found a 9,000-year-old message from a previously unknown civilization. She looked like a 23-year-old from Columbus, Ohio, who had been to space and back and was ready to say what she'd found. Ms. Reeves, Veth said, you left the station without authorization. I know, Maya said. I'm prepared to accept whatever administrative consequence applies. But first I need to speak with Professor Era and the academic board, and I need them to see this. She held up the portable data drive with the complete documentation and the analysis output from the museum. All of it, today. Veth looked at the drive. At her, at Liz, who stood just behind Maya with her tablet, and the expression of someone ready to back every word. This is not how academic process. With respect, Coordinator, academic process has never encountered this before. Maya met his eyes. Please, call the board. The emergency academic board session was convened 4 hours later in the main assembly hall. A large, formal room with tiered seating and excellent acoustics, designed for the kind of institutional proceedings that happen rarely and mattered significantly. Every member of the board was present. Professor Era sat at the center of the long table at the room's base, flanked by 11 other senior academics from multiple species. Coordinator Veth sat to one side with his administrative tablet, looking like a man who had not expected his day to go this way. The room's gallery seats, the observation area above the main floor, were full of students. Word had spread to Meridian crossed the way word always does in small academic communities, instantly and imperfectly, but with enough accurate detail that people knew something unusual was happening. Maya saw Ken in the gallery. He was watching her with an expression that was, for the first time since she'd met him, not dismissive. It was wary. She took her place at the presentation platform. Liz sat at the support station, ready to display documentation. Dr. Pale was connected via communication link from the Dravani Cultural Heritage Museum, his ancient translucent face calm on the screen. Professor Era looked at Maya with those deep-water eyes. "Ms. Reeves," she said, "you have asked for this proceeding. You will have 20 minutes to present your findings. The board will then ask questions." A pause. "I suggest you use your time well." "Yes," Maya said. "Thank you." She took a breath. Then she began. She laid it out in order, chronologically, the archive discovery, the symbol's occurrence across 7 cultural databases, the non-native material composition of the Dravani artifact, the sequential notation and its mathematical interval structure, the partial translation from Lys's grandmother's notes, the journey to Dravani, the opening of the artifact. She did not embellish. She did not editorialize. She presented documentation at each step: archive records, artifact scans, analysis outputs, Dr. Pale's institutional testimony, given live on the communication link. She was at 16 minutes when she reached the message itself. She displayed it on the main screen. Every word, the full translation, the coordinates, the final line. The room was completely still. Not the polite stillness of an academic proceeding. The other kind, the kind that descends on a room full of people, all of them highly educated and experienced and well defended against surprise, encounters something that genuinely none of them saw coming. "I want to address something directly," Maya said in the silence, "because it has been said in this room, in reference to my research, that humans have a tendency toward pattern recognition that exceeds available data, that we see faces in clouds, that we build mythology." She paused. "That is true, and it has also been responsible for every scientific advance our species has ever made, because the pattern we see before the data fully supports it is a hypothesis. The question, the thing we reach toward before we know how to prove it." She looked at the board, then briefly at the gallery. "At Ken, I am not standing here asking you to believe me. I am standing here asking you to look at the evidence. Because 9,000 years ago, someone left this evidence for exactly this moment. For the moment when people from different worlds were in the same room, looking at the same thing together and asking the same question." She held up her right hand. The tattoo was visible from every seat in the room. This symbol exists in 7 cultural archives. It exists on a 9,000-year-old artifact that was sealed until a human being opened it. It exists on my hand because my mother found in the book and put it there because she loved old things and didn't know why this one called to her. Her voice was steady. She didn't need to know why. She just kept it, and that's how it ended up here. She lowered her hand. "I am from a class for civilization. Earth has been in the Galactic Compact for 63 years. Some people in this room would say that means I haven't earned the right to make claims at this level." She kept her voice clean of anything defensive, but the architects didn't sort by classification level. They sorted by the willingness to cross the boundary, to look at something completely unlike yourself and try to understand it. She looked at the board. "I think that's worth considering." She stepped back from the platform. 21 seconds of total silence. Then Professor Era leaned forward. "Dr. Pale," she said, addressing the screen, "the artifact. What is your institution's official assessment of its origin?" Dr. Pale answered carefully, thoroughly, and with the full weight of 900 years of scientific experience. The board questions began. They lasted 3 hours. At some point during the second hour, Maya noticed Ken leave the gallery. She didn't know where he went. She put her attention back on the board and kept it there. When the session ended, not with conclusion, because conclusions of this scale didn't come in the afternoon, but with a formal commitment by the board to convene a multi-institutional research team and begin the process of official investigation. Professor Era asked Maya to remain when the room cleared. They sat across from each other at the long table, just the 2 of them. "You should know," Professor Era said, That I read your mother's paper. Maya blinked. My mother wasn't an academic. No. But 6 years ago, an Earth Liaison office submitted a collection of amateur cultural research to the Compact Archive. Your mother's work was included. She had spent decades collecting and cross-referencing what she called recurring symbols in human cultural history, tracing the same mark through centuries of folk art, manuscript illustrations, indigenous stonework, architectural decoration. Professor Era held Maya's gaze. She found the symbol in 47 places across human history. She believed it was evidence of very old and very widespread cultural practice, origin unknown. She paused. She submitted her findings 3 months before she died. Maya's throat tightened. She breathed through it. She didn't know, Maya said. She thought it was just human history. She knew it was important, Professor Era said. She just didn't have the rest of the picture. A pause. You gave her the rest of the picture. The room was empty and quiet around them. Through the high windows, space was visible, infinite and dark and scattered with light. The board will authorize the research team, Professor Era said. You will be part of it. Your work is a foundation of it, appropriately credited and documented. She looked at Maya steadily. Your scholarship is secure. Your administrative violations will be cleared in light of the circumstances. A long pause. You are not the student I expected. Maya thought about what to say to that. Then she said the only true thing. I know. Professor Era almost smiled. It was a small thing, brief and genuine. Good, she said. Maya walked back to her room to the corridors of Meridian Cross. Past students from 47 civilizations, past the Common and the repository, and the docking bay windows where you could see ships coming and going from every corner of the galaxy. She stopped in the corridor outside her door. Ken was there. He was standing with his arms at his sides, and no expression she could read. Tall and silver, and for the first time not deployed like a weapon, just standing, like a person. She waited. He said, the interval structure in the sequential notation. I checked it against my family's xenoarchaeological records when I left the session. A pause. There are 3 artifacts in my family's private collection that my grandmother recovered from a Velhari excavation site. Unmarked. Origin unknown. She classified them as prehistoric decorative objects. He stopped. They have marks on them. Maya looked at him. I'd like to have them properly analyzed, he said, with your framework. If, he stopped again. Started again. If you're willing. Maya held his gaze for a moment, thinking about the long road between here and where they'd started, about what it costs a person to walk up to someone they've dismissed and say you were right, about the fact that doing it anyway, when you could have just stayed quiet and let your grandmother's artifacts stay classified as decorative objects. That was, in its way, the same quality the architects have been looking for, the willingness to cross the boundary. Yes, she said, I'm willing. He nodded. He turned to go, then stopped. The symbol on your hand, he said, without turning around. In Velhari cultural history, there's an old saying, very old, predates our space travel by thousands of years. We never knew the origin. He paused. It translates as, the ones who carry the mark were never lost. We just didn't know what mark it meant. He left without looking back. Maya looked down at her hand. The tattoo, the symbol, her mother's drawing, her mother's finding, 9,000 years of waiting shaped into ink on the back of a 23-year-old's hand. You were here. That's enough. She pressed it against the cool wall of the corridor. She felt the hum of the station through her palm. 212 worlds, all of them together in one place, all of them finding each other slowly, imperfectly, across every possible difference, the way the architects had hoped, the way her mother, without knowing it, had helped make possible. She pushed off the wall. She had research to do. She had coordinates to follow. She had a door to find, somewhere in the space between stars, in coordinates that no current civilization had yet mapped. Something had been waiting for a very long time. It had never stopped waiting, because it had known from the beginning that the right person would find the key. It had just taken a girl from Columbus, Ohio, carrying her mother's mark on her hand, to finally turn it